What happens aback one of television's best acclimatized journalists decides? He's had abundant of aristocratic excuses and adeptnicities. You're about to attest in the best atomic morning television moment in contempo memory. And assurance me, you won't appetite to absence a distinct additional of this clash. Accomplish abiding to subscribe and be to animadversion beneath cogent me what you anticipate about how this all went down. The acceptable Morning America flat acquainted altered that morning. George Stephanopoulos sat beyond from Prince Harry. But article in the adept journalist's address appropriate, this wouldn't be the archetypal softball account aristocratic watchers had developed acclimatized to. The Duke of Sussex had accustomed assured edition affectionate Belvedere to air his grievances. But Stephanopoulos had acutely done his appointment and wasn't in the affection for apposite talking points. Your aristocratic highness, Stephanopoulos began, his accent measured but accustomed an angle that anon signaled trouble. You fabricated some rather austere allegations about your family, about the Academy of the Monarchy, and bluntly about the country that fabricated you who you, But I acquire to ask, aback does claimed accountability admission this anecdotal of yours? Harry confused uncomfortably, acutely not assured such a absolute opening. Well, George, I anticipate it's important to acquire the ambiance of aggregate. That happened, the pressures we were under, the abridgment of abutment we accustom from the Academy aback we bear it most. Context, Stephanopoulos repeated, aptitude advanced slightly. Let's allocution about context, then. You've accounting a acknowledged memoir, you've done assorted high-profile interviews. You and your wife acquire active advantageous deals account. Hundreds of millions of dollars, all while consistently criticizing the absolute ancestors and academy that gave you the Belvedere to do so. Advise me acquire how that's not accepting your block and bistro it too, the catechism afraid in the air like a challenge. Harry's media training kicked in as he attempted to deflect. I anticipate what Bodice charged to acquire is that this was never about money. This was about attention my family, attention my wife from the aforementioned analysis my mother received. But Prince Harry, Stephanopoulos interrupted, and the abeyance itself was significant, assuming he was in activity to let able answers accelerate by unchallenged. Your mother never wrote acquaint all books about the aristocratic family. She never sat bottomward for assorted interviews airing clandestine ancestors' conversations. She never confused to edition country and afresh spent years about criticizing the institution. So, how actually are you attention your ancestors by accomplishing all the things she never did? The allegory to Diana acutely stung. Harry's accord began to able as he responded with added califaction than polish. My mother didn't acquire the aforementioned opportunities to acquaint her adventure that we acquire today. She was silenced by the Academy and I banned to let that appear to my wife. Silenced? Stephanopoulos apprenticed his announcer instincts actually affianced now. Your mother gave one of the best acclaimed television interviews in British history. She battened to Andrew Morton for a book that rocked the monarchy. She had relationships with journalists throughout her life. How actually was she silenced aback she had admission to all-around media platforms whenever she chose to use them? Harry was visibly balked now. Acumen, he was adverse announcer who had actually done his analysis, rather than artlessly accoutrement to affable forum. You're a G my words, George. What I'm adage is that the Academy approved to ascendancy her anecdotal aloof like they approved to ascendancy ours. No, your aristocratic highness. I'm not a G anything. I'm allurement you to explain contradictions. In your own statements, you say you appetite privacy, yet you cloister publicity. You say you appetite to assure your family, yet you allotment affectionate capacity about clandestine conversations with your ancestor and brother. You say you adulation your family, yet you've spent years damaging their reputations publicly. Which is it? The flat admirers was actually silent analysis they were witnessing article unprecedented. This wasn't the cogwheel analysis Harry had accustomed in antecedent interviews. Stephanopoulos was alleviative him like any added accessible figure, authoritative accessible claims, and ambitious the aforementioned akin of accountability. Harry's face ablaze as he struggled to accomplish ascendancy of the narrative. George, I anticipate your actuality advisedly bird-brained here. The bearings is far added circuitous than your authoritative it out to be. Am I? Stephanopoulos attempt back, not giving an inch. Because from area I sit, it seems appealing straightforward. You've fabricated millions of dollars criticizing your ancestors while accompanying claiming you appetite reconciliation. You've, aggregate clandestine conversations that no reasonable actuality would apprehend to abide confidential. A fresh act afraid a back assurance breakdown. You've positioned yourself as a victim, while activity of amazing advantage that 99% of the apple could never dream of. So advise me acquire the complication I'm missing. The prince's aristocratic training was declining him actually now. You don't acquire what it's like to abound up in that environment, to acquire every move scrutinized, to acquire no ascendancy over your own life. Actually, Stephanopoulos said, his articulation accepting strength. I anticipate millions of bodies acquire actually what it's like to acquire no ascendancy over their lives. They're alleged animate people. They don't get to address books about their ancestors' problems for $20 actor advances. They don't get Netflix deals aback they're agitated with their relatives. They actually don't get arrive on morning television to explain why their advantaged activity has been so difficult. So, absolve me if I'm not non-affectionate to your struggles with Alcazar Protocol. Harry was now visibly angry. His anxiously complete accessible persona appear in absolute time. That's abundantly unfair, George. You're actually absolution, the absolute brainy bloom challenges that appear with this affectionate of scrutiny. I'm not absolution brainy bloom challenges at all, Stephanopoulos replied firmly. Brainy bloom is alarmingly important, and I'm animated you've announced about it. But accepting brainy bloom struggles doesn't accord you barrel flinch to accident-added people, including your own ancestors' members after consequences. You've aggregate capacity about clandestine conversations with your ancestor during some of the best difficult moments of his life. You've fabricated allegations about your brother's marriage. You've appropriated your stepmother manipulated your father. These aren't abstruse criticisms of an institution. These are claimed attacks on absolute bodies who appear to be your family. They are absolute people, Harry said, his articulation rising. And they fabricated absolute decisions that aching absolute people, my wife, my children, myself. We didn't acquire to be advised the way we were treated. But you did acquire how to respond, Stephanopoulos countered immediately. You chose to handle clandestine ancestors' disputes in the best accessible way possible. You chose to allotment affectionate conversations that any reasonable actuality would apprehend to abide confidential. You chose to body a media authority on the back of ancestors' drama. Those were your choices, your aristocratic highness, and choices acquire consequences. The account was ambiguous, actually out of Harry's control, and admirers could see him accumulate in absolute time. I anticipate your actuality advisedly adverse here, George. This isn't journalism. This is an appearance assassination. Stephanopoulos leaned back slightly, a baby smile arena at the corners of his mouth. Your aristocratic highness, allurement? Absolute questions about accessible statements you've fabricated isn't appearance assassination, it's journalism. And if you can't handle absolute questions about your own accomplishments and statements, conceivably you should amend accomplishing. Interviews area you accomplish austere allegations about added people. I'm not authoritative allegations, Harry protested. I'm administration my truth. Your truth, Stephanopoulos repeated, emphasizing the careful pronoun. That's an absorbing byword because truth, absolute truth, isn't personal. Facts are facts behindhand of how we feel about them. What your administration is your perspective, your feelings, your estimation of events, and that's fine. Your advantage to your perspective, but you've been presenting your angle as cold truth, and that's area. Problems arise. Harry was now actually flustered, a cumen he had absolved into an adept sheik in journalism from addition who had been accomplishing this best than he had been alive. I've been honest about aggregate I've shared. Have you? Stephanopoulos asked, his accent sharpening. Because you've accustomed adverse accounts of assorted contests beyond altered interviews and in your book. You've fabricated claims that added bodies acquired disputed. You've aggregate conversations that others bethink differently. So, which adaptation is the honest one? The prince was now acutely out of his depth. His media training actually bare for this akin of scrutiny. I've consistently been constant in my amount message. Your amount message, Stephanopoulos said, seems to be that anybody abroad is amiss and you're the victim. Your ancestors is wrong. The Academy is wrong. The British media is wrong. Alike some American media is amiss aback. They don't acquaint your adventure actually as you appetite it told. At what point do you exceed that maybe aloof, maybe some of the problems in these relationships ability axis from your own accomplishments and choices? The catechism hit like a sledgehammer. Harry sat in abashed blackout for a moment, acutely. Accepting never been asked so, anon to accede his own role in the conflicts he had spent years publicizing. Aback he assuredly spoke. His articulation was bound with about controlled anger. I anticipate this account is over, George. But Stephanopoulos wasn't finished. Actually, Your Aristocratic Highness, you agreed to this time slot, and we still acquire several account remaining. Unless you appetite to airing off set on a live television, which would actually accomplish for absorbing headlines, I advance. We abide this chat like adults. The blackmail to airing off set afraid in the air like a sword, but Stephanopoulos had alleged Harry's barefaced perfectly. The prince sat frozen, bent amid his acrimony and the ability that affronted off would actualize the affectionate of account that would attenuate aggregate he had been aggravating to accomplish. The adept announcer apprenticed his advantage. Alive he had his answerable actually area he capital him. Now, Stephanopoulos continued, his articulation calm but relentless. Let's allocution about article you said in your book that I begin. Decidedly interesting. You wrote about a concrete argument with your brother area he allegedly agape you to the floor. You aggregate affectionate capacity about this clandestine moment amid siblings. Can you advise me acquire why you anticipation the apple bear to apperceive about that? Harry's easily clenched hardly in his lap. Because it showed the absoluteness of what our accord had become, the burden we were all under. The reality, Stephanopoulos repeated. But here's what I don't understand. You've additionally said afresh that you adulation your brother, that you appetite to board with your family, that you achievement to adjustment these relationships. How does about base your brother by administration capacity of what you call? As the everyman moment in your accord advice accomplished that goal? I wasn't aggravating to abase anyone, Harry said. But his articulation lacked conviction. Really? Stephanopoulos leaned forward. Because if Addition wrote a book anecdotic, a clandestine concrete argument with me, allotment me specifically, administration capacity about my affecting state, my words, my accomplishments during what was acutely a moment of acute accent and ancestors' crisis, I would feel appealing humiliated, wouldn't you? Harry opened his aperture to respond, afresh bankrupted again, acutely acumen the allurement he had absolved into. And that brings me to Addition point, Stephanopoulos continued, analysis his advantage. You've talked abundantly about privacy, about absent to assure your ancestors from media intrusion. Yet you've aggregate added affectionate capacity about your family's clandestine activity than any abridged anytime could? You've told the apple about clandestine conversations with your dying grandmother. You've declared claimed interactions with your ancestor during his blight diagnosis. You've aggregate capacity about your brother's marriage, your stepmother's relationships, alike clandestine moments with your own children. How is that attention privacy? Those beliefs bear to be told, Harry said weakly. To appearance the accuracy. About what actually happened, whose truth? Stephanopoulos attempt back. Because I noticed that in all these stories, anybody abroad comes beyond ailing while you're consistently portrayed as the reasonable one, the victim, the actuality aggravating to do the appropriate thing. That's not truth, Your Aristocratic Highness. That's careful storytelling advised to accomplish you attending acceptable at anybody else's expense. The flat was actually bashful now. The restriction so blubbery it was about suffocating. Harry was visibly struggling, his anxiously complete accessible angel crumbling in absolute time beneath adamant questioning. Let me ask you article else. Stephanopoulos continued, assuming no mercy. You fabricated austere allegations about racism oral your ancestors and the institution. These are abundantly austere accused that acquire damaged reputations and relationships about the world. But a back apprentice for specifics, you've been appreciably vague. You won't name names. You won't bore details. You won't action evidence. How is that fair to the bodies you're about accusing of racism? I never accused anyone accurately of racism, Harry protested. You actually did, Stephanopoulos accursed aback immediately. You and your wife sat bottomward with Oprah Winfrey and fabricated allegations about conversations. Apropos your son's bark color, you've accounting about benumbed bent oral the family. You've appropriate that the institution's analysis of your wife was racially motivated. These aren't abstruse criticisms. These are specific allegations adjoining specific people. And aback those bodies can't acknowledge after actualization to advance you publicly, you put them in an absurd position. Harry's accord was actually gone now? You don't acquire the bearings we were in, the burden we were under, the way we were actuality treated. I acquire that you acquainted pressure, Stephanopoulos said, his articulation demography on a harder edge. But burden doesn't absolve antibacterial relationships with bodies who adulation you. Burden doesn't absolve authoritative accessible allegations you can't or won't substantiate. Burden doesn't absolve architecture a career on ancestors, ball while accompanying claiming you appetite aloofness and reconciliation, we approve to. Assignment oral the system, Harry said desperately. We approved to acquisition a way to accomplish it work, but they wouldn't let us. They wouldn't let you do what exactly? Stephanopoulos demanded. Acquire your block and eat it too? Because that's what you were allurement for, wasn't it? You capital to accumulate all the allowances of aristocratic status, the titles, the security, the platform, the account that comes with the academy, while additionally accepting complete abandon to do whatever you wanted. Say whatever you wanted. Assignment with whoever you capital after any of the responsibilities or constraints that appear with actuality animate royal. That's not true, Harry said, but his beef articulate hollow. Isn't it? Stephanopoulos pressed. Because aback you couldn't acquire both. You chose to leave in a fresh spent years advancing the academy that wouldn't angle all its rules to board your desires. You've portrayed this as actuality affected out, but you weren't affected out. You chose to leave because you couldn't get aggregate you capital on your own terms. Harry was now acutely angry, his aristocratic training actually abandoned. You acquire no abstraction what you're talking about, George. You don't apperceive what it's like to alive in that environment, to acquire every aspect of your activity controlled by an academy that doesn't affliction about you as a person. You're right, Stephanopoulos said, his articulation assent to bout Harry's energy. I don't apperceive what it's like to be built-in into amazing privilege, to acquire admission to the best apprenticeship money can buy, to biking the apple on addition else's dime, to acquire my accommodating assignment amplified by all around. Media, to acquire doors opened everywhere I go because of my ancestor's name. I don't apperceive what that's like because I'm one of the billions of bodies who had to assignment for aggregate I have. The advance was adverse in its artlessness and truth. Harry sat aghast as Stephanopoulos continued. But here's what I do apperceive about ancestors' relationships, your aristocratic highness. Aback you acquire a botheration with addition you love, you allocution to them privately. You don't address books about them. You don't do television interviews advancing them. You don't body a media authority on their dysfunction. You actually don't annoyance your ancestors' ball into the accessible apple and the fresh act, afraid aback relationships deteriorate. They wouldn't listen, Harry said weakly. Acquisitive for any defense. How do you know? Stephanopoulos demanded. Because from what you've aggregate publicly, it sounds like you went from clandestine disagreements to accessible warfare appealing quickly. It sounds like you acclimated the blackmail of accessible acknowledgement as advantaging clandestine. Ancestors' discussions and a back that didn't get you what you wanted, you followed through on those threats. Harry was now actually defeated, sitting angled in his armchair as the abounding weight of his contradictions comatose bottomward about. I aloof capital to be heard, he said quietly. You've been heard, Stephanopoulos said, his articulation abatement slightly, but actual firm, the absolute apple has heard you. You've had assorted all-around platforms to allotment your perspective. You've accounting acknowledged books, done primetime interviews, created documentaries, accustomed speeches. You've been heard added than about any clandestine aborigine in history. The catechism is, what are you activity to do with that belvedere now? Are you activity to abide application it to relitigate ancestors' grievances, or are you activity to use it to actually accomplish the absolute aberration you affirmation you appetite to make? The catechism afraid in the air as Harry struggled to acquisition an acknowledgment that didn't added attenuate his position. Finally he spoke, his articulation about aloft a whisper. I anticipate we should move on to added topics. Actually, Stephanopoulos said, blockage his watch with effective precision, I anticipate that's all the time we acquire today. Your aristocratic highness acknowledge you for abutting us on acceptable morning America. The account concluded with Harry sitting in abashed silence. Acutely acumen, he had aloof accomplished the best absolute journalistic dismantling of his accessible persona he had any time encountered. Stephanopoulos had done what no accuser had managed to do before. He had captivated Prince Harry, answerable for his own words and actions. Abnegation to acquire victimhood as an alibi for behavior that had damaged relationships and institutions. As the cameras chock-full rolling, admirers had witnessed article unprecedented. A affiliate of the aristocratic ancestors' actuality advised like any added accessible amount authoritative accessible claims. Subjected to the aforementioned analysis, an accountability that absolute journalism demands. It was a masterclass in how interviews should be conducted aback ambidextrous with able bodies who apprehend acquiescence rather than accuracy-seeking. What did you anticipate of this actually barbarous takedown? Subscribe to the approach and animadversion beneath with your thoughts on whether Stephanopoulos went too far or if this is actually the affectionate of journalism we charge added of. Aback ambidextrous with celebrities and accessible abstracts who anticipate their cachet makes them allowed to boxy questions.